Hello everyone and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We're holding a Mishnah Berurah Chelik Daled, and Mir Hashem today we will be learning Daf Reish Mem Ches Amud Beis. We pick up today on the very bottom line of the Shulchan Aruch on Reish Mem Ches Amud Aleph with a new Siman Shin Pei Aleph Dinei HaMevatel Rishusai, the halachas that pertain to somebody who was mevatel his rishus, either just in the Chotzer or his bias in the Chotzer, to the other Bnei HaChotzer, or to the other entities. Different cases, different scenarios, we'll have to see. But dinei mevatel rishusai v'avar v'hoitzi. And then, after being mevatel his rishus, he went ahead and he was moitzi. He took out a keli sheshavas pabayis from his house to the chotzer, which he is not allowed to do. What problems does that make, etc., etc.? Ubay zayin seifim, and here we have 7 seifim. Our learning today should be a schus for Achenu Kabeis Yisrael Hanusun Batzaru Bashivya Ha'imdim Bein Bayam Ubein Bayabasha Hamakim Yerachem Aleihem V'Yetziam Yitzar L'Rvacha Me'afela La'ira Mishibur L'Geula Hashta Bagala V'Zman Kariv and Imar Amen. Our learning should be a schus for Fuhr Shalema for Achia Gadol Moshemer Ben Esther Fradel Rivka Bashir Leah Chava Hadassah Bas Rezel Serel Yeshua Levi Ben Ahuva Malka Chana and Yerucham Ben Masha. They should all have a refuah shalema b'soich shar chayla Yisrael. The Rebbeinu Shalom should watch over every member of Klal Yisrael. I keep on saying the Rebbeinu Shalom should watch over every member of Klal Yisrael, all of our brothers and sisters who find themselves in harm's way. I'm afraid that at this point in time I might have to just amend it, and just the Rebbeinu Shalom should watch over every member of Klal Yisrael, because unfortunately every member of Klal Yisrael might be finding themselves in harm's way with all the news that you hear lately. Okay, be that Shema Yisrael, Shmar She'eretz Yisrael, Val Yovad Yisrael Ha'imrim Shema Yisrael. Okay, says the Mechaber Shin Pei Aleph, Sif Aleph. Hamevatel Rishusai. So, we've been discussing quite a bit the halachas whereby somebody could relinquish his rishus, and again, this bittul rishus that we've been speaking of, I was talking to one of my listeners last night. This bittul rishus that we're speaking about is a very complex bittul rishus. Chazal are kind of walking a tightrope over here. On the one hand, we have learned that this being mevatel rishus is being misalik rishusai. He's relinquishing, he's removing himself from the chotzer, and it's not a kinyan, right? That's why we learned in Shin Pei, in Sif Aleph, we said, Ve'ein sarach liknois bekinyan suder. We don't need to make any kind of formal act of kinyan, because like the Mishnah Berurah said in Shin Pei's Katan Gimel, Dehu rak siluk rishusa ba'alma. When he's mevatel his rishus, he's relinquishing his rishus. He's not being makne it to anybody else. He's just being mesalik himself. Rak silik rishus ba'alma. Shemesalik atzmei me rishusa kidei shalo yeser aleim. He's removing himself so that he doesn't present a problem to the other bnei HaChotzer. At the same time, we see that the bnei HaChotzer have to pick up that rishus that he's being mesalik himself from, and that's why we're going to see that there are issues. What if he takes it back? There are issues that he has to give it over to each and every one, right? Because everybody has to go get it. It's a complicated derabanan. Be that as it may, he says the Mechaber over here, HaMevatel Rishusai, V'hoitzi achakach mi beis l'chotzer. So Ruvain was mevatel his rishus in the chotzer, but after he was mevatel his rishus in the chotzer, he went ahead and he transferred a keli sheshavas pabayis out to the chotzer. Says the Mechaber, B'shoigeg, if he did this inadvertently, he just forgot, oh yeah, why can't I take something from the house? I'm going to the Pirkei Avos share. Let me grab a Pirkei Avos and take it out to the chotzer. And he forgot that he's not allowed to, because since he was mevatel his rishus in the chotzer, now his house and the chotzer are two distinct rishuyos. So he's not allowed to do that, right? But he went ahead and he did it. But he did it inadvertently. B'shoigeg, if he did it b'shoigeg, einoi oiser. He doesn't create any new problem. His bittul rishus remains extant, or extant, however you want to pronounce it. His bittul rishus is still effective, and the Erev is okay, But b'mezid, if he did this with intent, if he purposely, he knew the halacha, and for whatever reason, he decided he's transferring his mishnayos out to the chotzer, oiser. Now he's going to aser on the other bnei chotzer. Why? Shaharei chayzer mibituloi shebitel. Because by going with malice aforethought, by going b'mezid and transferring a keli sheshavas babayis out to the chotzer, effectively what he's doing is he's taking back the reshus that he relinquished. He said, listen, I know I'm making problems for you guys. I'm going to relinquish my rights to the chotzer so that the chotzer is no longer serving me. It's only serving you. And you guys have an Erev, so you're okay. But me, I can't use the chotzer because my house is distinct. I can't use the chotzer. But now he went ahead and he did use the chotzer from his house. And like we said, he did it with malice aforethought. He did it b'mezid. So he's retaking his hishtamshus in the chotzer. He's being mavatal his bittul rishus, and that's going to cause difficulties. Let's see the Mishnah Berurah over here. Says the Mishnah Berurah back on Reish Mem Ches Amad Aleph. Mishnah Berurah is cut in Aleph. V'hoitzi achakach. Very cryptic Mishnah Berurah here. Says the Mishnah Berurah Pirush. What does it mean that he was moitzi achakach? Pirush sha'avar v'hoitzi. Well, he wasn't allowed to do this, right? He's not allowed to be moitzi a keli sheshavas babayis out to the chotzer. Now, there's a very interesting Shar Hatzion over here. There is a certain implication in this Shar Hatzion that troubles me a little bit. I haven't had time to research it fully, so I'm not going to expand upon it. But you should know, if as we read the Shar Hatzion, you pick up on something that's troubling you also, maybe we're on the same page. Says the Chavetz Chaim in the Shar Hatzion. I'm speaking to one particular listener over here, by the way. Okay, says the Shar Hatzion, nice cut in Aleph. Loi mibaya im loi bitul rishus beisai. Certainly, let's say it's Ruvain that had to be mevatel his rishus to the other bnei chotzer. Let's give the classic case, right? There's 4 people in the chotzer: Ruvain, Shimon, Levi, and Yehuda. Shimon, Levi, and Yehuda, they joined in an Eruv Chatzeros. Ruvain got left out. Ruvain is mevatel his rishus. He goes to Shimon, I'm mevatel my rishus to you. Levi, I'm mevatel my rishus to you. Yehuda, I'm mevatel my rishus to you. Now Shimon, Levi, and Yehuda, they're joined in an Eruv Chatzeros. Shimon, Levi, and Yehuda, they could transfer kelim sheshavsu b'beisam from their houses to the chotzer, vice versa. Ruvain is left out in the cold. Ruvain cannot transfer from his house to the chotzer. Why? Because his house and the chotzer are 2 different reshuyos. The chotzer now belongs to Shimon, Levi, and Yehuda. Doesn't belong to him. He gave up his rights. So his house, the chotzer, 2 separate reshuyos. Is he allowed to transfer from his house to the chotzer? No. Why not? Because it's an iser hoitzah midrabanan. He's transferring from his house out to a different rishus hayachid that he is not mu'uriv with. He doesn't have an erev together with that rishus. So it's usher for him to do that mitam an iser hoitzah midrabanan. Says the Shar Hatzion, certainly, if he was only mevatel his rishus in the chotzer and not in his house, which is always the default, right? The usher, that's certainly usher for Reuven to do. Shaharei moitzi me rishus l'rishus, because he's being moitzi from one rishus hayachid to a separate, distinct rishus hayachid. Ukedela el siman shin pei sif aleph. Ella afilu even in bitel gam rishus beisai. Says the Chavetz Chaim, you should know. Let's say Ruvain also relinquished his rights over his house. Now, technically, if you do the math, right, if Ruvain was mevatel the rishus of his house as well as the rishus of the chotzer to the other bnei chotzer, well, then his house and the chotzer are not distinct rishuyos. He relinquished both of them to the other bnei chotzer. But says the Chavetz Chaim, afilu in bitel gam rishus beisar gam kein aser lahoitzi. It's still going to be usher for Ruvain to transfer from his house to the chotzer, a keli sheshavas babayis. Now, again, this case is different than the first case. In the first case, the reason he's not allowed to do it is because by doing so, he's being moitzi me rishus l'rishus. In the second case, he's not being moitzi me rishus l'rishus, right? His house, the chotzer, same status. He relinquished his rishus over both of them to the other bnei chotzer. So what's the problem? Why can't he transfer from his house to the chotzer? Says the Chavetz Chaim, Shaharei al yedei hoitza'asai chayzer mi bituloi. because that is still considered that he's being mevatel his bittul rishus. That's still called being mishtamish with the chotzer. V'yesh iser l'mafreya. And now retroactively, he's undoing what he accomplished by being mevatel rishus, and it becomes aser because there's no erev. So again, even though in this case, really, he's not being moitzi me rishus l'rishus, he still can't do this because it's still going to represent a bittul of his bittul rishus, because he is now going and making use of the chotzer. He's still going and being mishtamish with the chotzer the same way everybody else is. So what do you mean he was mavatal his rishus? He wasn't mavatal his rishus. And remember, we learned earlier that we can't say that he's an oreach. We can't go ahead and say, no, he's not really being mevatel his rishus when he's going and taking something out of his house and taking it to the chotzer. He's an oreach in the chotzer. He's like a guest. No, we said earlier that a person can't be an oreach in his own house. We don't give somebody the status of a guest, the status of an oreach, when he's living in his own house. So if he goes from his own house and he transfers the Keli Sheshavas Babayis to the chotzer, even though he was mevatel rishus over his bias, doesn't matter. That's still called a hishtamshus of the chotzer, and he's being mevatel his bittul rishus. Okay. Let's go weiter. So again, let's not lose track of the halacha over here. So the mevatel went ahead, and now he was over, and now he transferred a Keli Sheshavas Babayis from his house to the chotzer. He's taking back his rights. He's mevatel his bittul rishus. B'shoigig, not a problem. B'mezid, it's a problem. Says the Mishnah Berurah, ois cotton beis, b'mezid, oiser al b'nei chotzer l'tatel. If he does this b'mezid, he reverses his bittul rishus. Now the other people can't be moitzi from their houses to the chotzer, vice versa, because now the chotzer is again serving multiple entities, them and Ruvain, because Ruvain's bittul rishus is over and done with. Ois cotton gimel, shaharei chayzer, he's reversing his bittul rishus. Says the Mishnah Berurah, shenireh kechayzer umachzik b'rishus shebitel. By going ahead and doing this hishtamshus in the chotzer, it looks like he's reversing his bittul rishus. What do you mean you were mevatel rishus? You're using it like everybody else is. Nevertheless, says the Chavetz Chaim, let's say this happened, right? So Ruvain was mevatel his rishus to Shimon, Levi, and Yehuda, and then on Shabbos he says, enough with this. I'm going and I'm taking something out to the chotzer. Then Shimon, Levi, and Yehuda come over to him and say, what are you doing? What are you doing? You were just mevatel your bittul rishus. You just brought down our erev. He says, chatasi avisi pashati. It was bad what I did. I did the wrong thing. I'm going to be mevatel rishus to you all over again. I'm going to be mevatel rishus now. Remember, we learned you're allowed to be mevatel rishus on Shabbos because it's not an act of mekach or memkar. It's not an act of kinyan. So it's not aser. Nevertheless, says the Chavetz Chaim, if he makes a new bittul rishus, mahani, that new bittul rishus is effective, and the erev will be reestablished. Kasav Magen Avram, the Magen Avram writes, and this is the Magen Avram we've already dealt with earlier. We only say that a person is reversing the bittul rishus and retaking his rights that he relinquished, only when he transfers a Keli Sheshavas Babayis from the bias to the chotzer. Only in that direction. But if he takes a Keli Sheshavas B'chotzer and he brings it into the bias, that does not represent a retaking of the rishus that he relinquished. He's not really using the chotzer. He's using the bias, right? When is it a problem? When he's retaking the chotzer. That means you're taking something from the bias, transferring it to the chotzer. But to take from the chotzer to the bias, the Magen Avram says, is not a reversal of the bittul rishus. Ukvar kasavdu le'el simin shin peis if cotton tezayin. We already wrote earlier. Shekama peiskim cholkam alzeh. Many peiskim differ with this Magen Avram with Sfir Lahu, and they hold the ein chiluk bein hoitzah lahachnasa. There is no halachic difference in the direction. It doesn't matter if you take something out to the chotzer or take something from the chotzer into the bias. Ukemoy deloy mechalkinan bein hoitzah lahachnasa linyan hechsik. ukamai deloy mechalkinan bein hoitzala achnasa leinyan hechsik. We don't find that there's any difference between the direction that you go in when it comes to the other bnei chotzer being machzik in the rishus that the mevatel relinquished. By the recipients of the bittul rishus, we say that they are taking the rishus that was relinquished by the mevatel, either by taking their kelim from their houses to the chotzer, or by taking something from the chotzer to their bayis. Either way, it's considered that they're machzik in the bittul rishus. So too, the other place can say over here, when it comes to the mevatel retaking his bittul rishus, also there's no difference in the direction. Let's go weiter in the Mechaber top line, Reish Mem Kesam and Beis, by those cotton dalid for the Mishnah Berurah. Okay, so we see the problem. The mevatel could reverse his bittul rishus, but, says the Mechaber, Vim hechzikoi by kfar. But if the recipients of the bittul rishus, the other bnei chotzer, were already machzik, they already took ownership, so to speak, of the rishus that the mevatel relinquished, Vim hechzik by kfar. What does that mean? Says the Mechaber, what we just spoke out, Shoitziu mi bateim lechotzer. Either what the recipients of the bittul rishus did, they were moitzi kelim sheshavsu babayis from their houses to the chotzer. So Shimon, Levi, and Yehuda, each one of them, they went ahead, they took a pitcher of lemonade, they brought it out to the chotzer, so they were machzik in the rishus that Reuven relinquished. Or if it went in the other direction, or says the Mechaber beferish that in the case of the recipients of the bittul rishus, they could be machzik in the bittul rishus in either direction, whether they took a keli sheshavas babayis from their house to the chotzer, or they took something from the chotzer to the bayis. Either way, that constitutes being machzik in the rishus. Eino yachal lachzar mibitulai. Now the Reuven, who was mevatel his rishus, now he can no longer take it back. What does it mean he can no longer take it back? Even if now he goes ahead and he's over, and he takes something from his house and puts it out to the chotzer, it's wrong. He's not allowed to do it. But it's not going to create problems for the rest of the bnei chotzer. We're not going to look at it and say, oh, Reuven was just mevatel his bittul rishus. He can't be mevatel his bittul rishus anymore. Once the recipients took hold of it, he can no longer be mevatel it. And again, how do the recipients take hold of it? By being machzik in it, by going ahead and using it. By them going and transferring from their house to the chotzer, or from the chotzer to their houses, that constitutes they were machzik in the bittul rishus. Now the mevatel can no longer take it back. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Eis Katan Dalet. V'im hechziku kaidem shechotzer v'hoitzi kelav. If before the mevatel went ahead and did an act that would constitute reversal, if before that happened, the recipients of the bittul rishus were machzik in the bittul rishus, now it doesn't matter what the mevatel does. Hey, ain't a yokalachzer. And this is such a fascinating Mishnah Berurah over here, right? Why? The Mishnah Berurah wants to know why. Why is it that way? That once they were machzik, the mevatel can't go ahead and turn it around. So the Mishnah Berurah is going to show us that this is not stam, like the Chazal sat around the table and they were writing the rule books and they decided that they should write such a rule. No, it's based on something. It says the Mishnah Berurah, "Eina yachal achzar the b'chol mokai b'chazaka ma'ila b'kniya." Because learn Baba Kama, learn Baba Mitzia, learn Baba Basra. What you'll find out is that chazaka is always considered to be an act of kinyan, right? Somebody buys a field. How does he acquire the field? What's the act of kinyan that he does on the field? He makes a chazaka. He goes around the perimeter and checks it out. He puts up a geder. He makes a serious change in the sadeh. So chazaka, taking hold of something, is considered an act of kinyan. Chazaka also, there's a different type of chazaka. You have something long enough, it establishes ownership. But chazaka is always associated with kinyan, with acquiring something. Therefore, it says the Mishnah Berurah, "V'afal gav she'ein zu chazaka gemura," even though this is like a funny kind of chazaka, that you just went ahead and transferred a pitcher of lemonade from the house to the chotzer, afilu hachi, even so, hekelu chachamim ba the Chachamim were makel here, the Mahani Kishar Chazakos. In other words, Chazal looked at a precedent. They said that there exists the precedent of Chazaka being an act of acquisition. So when they wrote the rules of Eruv Chatzeros, they looked and they said, what would constitute Chazaka over here? Well, we're talking about relinquishing rights to the Chatzer, establishing that you have the rights to the Chazaka, to the bittul, to the Rishus in the Chatzer. How do you do that? By using it. That's how you establish your ownership. Chazaka, you use it. So the usage, the hishtamshus, in that Rishus is what acquires it for the recipients of the bittul Rishus. Uladeyazu, according to this opinion, this first opinion of the Mechaber, because we're about to see a Shitas Rashi that's going to differ with this, but Uladeyazu, according to this Deo Rishona over here in the Mechaber, Mahani Chazaka, the recipients of the bittul Rishus is effective. Did I say that right? The Chazaka of the recipients of the bittul Rishus is effective af im hechsik be'erev Shabbos achar habitul. Even if they're machzik in the Rishus of the Mevatel on Erev Shabbos after the Mevatel was already Mevatel Rishus. So just let's realize what the Mechaber just said. Let's say this bittul Rishus took place before Shabbos. Remember, the idea that bittul Rishus could work on Shabbos is a shtickle chiddush, right? It's not considered mekach or memkar. It's not a business transaction. It's only a silik ba'alma. You could do it on Shabbos, right? So we know that the bittul Rishus can work on Shabbos, but the bittul Rishus could also work before Shabbos. Why are they doing bittul Rishus before Shabbos? Let them just make an erev, whatever. I don't know. They ran out of pas. Whatever. I'm not going to go there. But they're doing bittul Rishus before Shabbos. So Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda in the Chatzer, they realized Reuven never joined the Eruv Chatzeros. Reuven says, you know what, let's just take care of this right here and now. I'm about to Rishus to you, I'm about to Rishus to you, I'm about to Rishus to you. Boom, you're all good. You could all transfer from your houses to the Chatzer. Me, I can't transfer from my house to the Chatzer. I don't care. Lo yichpatli, it doesn't bother me. And fine, everything is dandy. So the bittul Rishus was done before Shabbos. Now, before Shabbos begins, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, they go to take pictures of lemonade out from their houses to the Chatzer. Now, is there any real significance to the act of taking a pitcher of lemonade from inside the house out to the Chatzer before Shabbos begins? We're not even going to call it a Keli Sheshavas Babayis. It's not Shavas, right? Ben Hashmashas didn't kick in yet. So this pitcher of lemonade is not a Keli Sheshavas Babayis. It's a Keli Friday babayis. And you take it out from the house and you bring it to the Chatzer. There doesn't seem to be any significance to that act at all, right? It's like taking a pitcher of lemonade out to the Chatzer on Tuesday. What is it? It's nothing. It has no significance in the world of Eruv Chatzeros at all, you would think. How does that show that you're being machzik in the Rishus that was relinquished by Reuven? How does that show a hishtamshus that represents a type of hishtamshus that Reuven gave up and that they took? It's Friday. There's no significance here at all. Yet, the day of Rishon of the Mechaber holds that no, if the bittul Rishus was done before Shabbos, as long as they go ahead and they do the act of transferring from the house to the Chatzer, even though it's not Shabbos, that constitutes being machzik in the bittul Rishus. That's the day of Rishon. And that's what the Mechaber, the Mishnah Berurah is just pointing out over here. We just learned the day of Rishona understand that according to this opinion of the Mechaber, you can do this on Friday. And once the recipients of the bittul Rishus did this on Friday or on Thursday, right? Now, if after Shabbos begins, the Mevatel goes ahead and uses the Ishtamshus of the Chatzer, he transfers a Keli Shavas Babayis out to the Chatzer. That's not problematic. That's not called that he was Mevatel his bittul Rishus before they were machzik. No, they were machzik already. They were machzik before Shabbos. But according to this opinion, that act of being machzik is effective. Okay. Says the Mishnah Cotton Hay, Eina Yachal Atzar. Since the recipients of the Bittul Rishus were already Machzik in the Bittul Rishus, now the Mavatal can't go back on it. The Bechom, we did this already. We did this already. Okay, now let's go to the second opinion. Second line down, middle of the line, says the Mechaber Ula Rashi. But according to Shitas Rashi, Ein Chazaka Meyeles El Imkein Hechziku Meshachashecha. According to Rashi, this all has to happen on Shabbos. Because like we said, before Shabbos, it has no significance. And we can definitely hear the svara of Rashi. Says the Mishra Katvav Meshachashecha, because if you do this before Shabbos begins, doesn't mean anything, doesn't show anything. What are you telling me that somehow this constitutes a chazaka in the bittul rishus? No, you did something that has no context in Eruv Chatzeros. Gam beloy bittul yicham lahitzi alachnes. So it wasn't affected by the bittul rishus. The fact that you could transfer on Friday afternoon. In the Bir Halacha, the Chavetz Chaim comes out that really you should be machmir like Shitas Rashi. Okay, let's go to Sif Beis. Sif Beis, you just have to halt cup. You just have to follow along. No tremendous chedushim here in Sif Beis. Sif Beis is an application of all of the math that we've learned until now. So it can get a little bit choppy, it can get a little bit confusing. You just have to follow along. It can get confusing for me too, by the way. Okay, says the Mechaber Sif Beis. So far, in all of our discussions of Bittul Rishus, we've really been discussing cases where the Bittul Rishus is internal to one Chotzer. Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, somebody got left out, Reuven got left out, he's going to be Mavatal Rishus to the unified group of Shimon, Levi, Yehuda. Maybe the unified group of Shimon, Levi, Yehuda are going to be Mavatal Rishus to Reuven. Maybe Reuven and Shimon got left out, Levi and Yehuda joined, Reuven and Shimon are going to be Mavatal Rishus to Levi and Yehuda, but we've really been discussing scenarios that have always been internal to one Chotzer. Now, says the Mechaber, you should know, Yesh Bittul Rishus me Chotzer leChotzer. You could also do Bittul Rishus from one Chotzer to another Chotzer. And now, the Mechaber is going to give us two different scenarios where there's a Bittul Rishus from one Chotzer to another Chotzer. So, just so you should be able to follow along, the Mechaber is going to do this in a bit of a funny way. He's going to give us scenario number one, then he's going to give us scenario number two, then he's going to make a statement that is going to apply to scenario number one, not to scenario number two. So again, scenario number one, scenario number two, and then a statement that applies to scenario number one, not to scenario number two. Let's see it inside. Says the Mechaber. Yesh bittul rishos bechotzer lechotzer. You can have bittul rishos from one chotzer to another. Loishna, doesn't matter, no difference. Scenario number one. Shtei chatzeros upesach beinehen. You have chotzer A, chotzer B, separated by a wall. The wall has a pesach. Options open. If they want, they could join in one eruv chatzeros. If they desire, they could make two separate eruv chatzeros. Ve'ervu kalachas latzma. And what they decided to do was, they decided to go ahead and make two separate eruv chatzeros. So chotzer A has a perfectly good eruv chatzeros. The people of chotzer A, they're allowed to transfer kelim sheshavsu babayis from their houses to the chotzer, vice versa, etc., etc. Chotzer B has a perfect eruv chatzeros. In chotzer B, the residents could also transfer from their houses to the chotzer, vice versa. Could you transfer a kelim sheshavsu babayis in chotzer A to chotzer B? No, not allowed to do that because they're not joined in a joint eruv chatzeros. So if the Pirkei Avos drasha is in chotzer B, could a guy in chotzer A take a mishnayos from inside his house, bring it Shabbos afternoon to chotzer B? No, he's not allowed to. So to vice versa from chotzer B to chotzer A. But now they decided that they're not happy with this. The Pirkei Avos drasha is taki in chotzer B, and somebody in chotzer A wants to be able to transfer from his house in chotzer A to the chotzer in chotzer B. Is there a way to rectify this problem? Yes, there is. You know how? The people of chotzer B could go ahead and they could be mevatel rishus to the people of Chatzar A. So Chatzar B is one group, right? All the residents of Chatzar B are unified by an Eruv Chatzeres. All the people of Chatzar A are unified by an Eruv Chatzeres. But the problem is they're not joined. So Ruvain, who lives in Unit 1 of Chatzar A, cannot take his Mishnayos and bring it to the Chatzar of Chatzar B. So the people of Chatzar B, the unified group of Chatzar B, will be mevatel the reshus that they have over their Chatzar. They'll be mevatel it to Chatzar A. What does that do? Now, Chatzar B is now an extension of Chatzar A. All the houses in Chatzar A, and Chatzar A's Chatzar, and Chatzar B's Chatzar are now all one Rishus. So now Reuven and Chatzar A can take his Mishnayos out of his house in Chatzar A and bring it to the Chatzar B, because he's the recipient, they're the recipient in Chatzar A of the Bittul Rishus of Chatzar B. How about in Chatzar B? Now in Chatzar B, the people in Chatzar B cannot take their Mishnayos out of their houses to their Chatzar, because now their houses and their Chatzar are now distinct Rishuyos Hayachid, right? They relinquished their rights over their Chatzar. So that's scenario number 1 here of Sif Beis, where you're going to have Bittul Rishus across Chatzeros. The people of Chatzar B are being mevatel the Rishus that they have over their Chatzar to the people of Chatzar A. Okay, that was scenario number 1. And we could right away take a look at Mishnah Berurah's Katan Zayin and Ches. Says the Mishnah Berurah's Katan Zayin, Yesh Bittul Rishus b'Chatzar l'Chatzar, K'moish Yesh Bittul Rishus b'Bayis l'Bayis b'Chatzar Echad. The same way it's Shaykh Bittul Rishus internally from one resident of a Chatzar to another resident of the same Chatzar, you could also have Bittul Rishus across Chatzeros. Scenario number 1, ve'ervu kalachas la'atzma, the Eloi ervu, points out the Mishnah Berurah. The case that we had is that all Chatzar A has an Eruv Chatzeros of their own, Chatzar B has an Eruv Chatzeros of their own. Now, the way I gave you the case, the people of Chatzar B are being mevatel rishus to Chatzar A. Says the Mishnah Berurah, the Eloi ervu. If they don't each have their own Eruv Chatzeros, ein mevatlin. Let's say Chatzar A did not have an Eruv Chatzeros. If Chatzar A did not have an Eruv Chatzeros, could Chatzar B be mevatel to them? No, they can't. K'moishin is bar b'simin shin pei, the lishnayim ein mevatlin. Levisha kol echad oisar al chaveroi. The people of Chatzar B would not be able to be mevatel rishus to the people of Chatzar A. If Reuven, Shimon, Levi, and Yehuda and Chatzar A didn't have an Eruv Chatzeros, how would that play out? Right? Let's say the people of Chatzar B had an Eruv Chatzeros. So as a unified group, they come to Chatzar A and they go to Reuven and they say, we're mevatel rishus to you. Does that bittul rishus affect anything? No. Reuven just got rights over Chatzar B. But Reuven is still usher, because Reuven has living in his Chatzar Shimon, Levi, and Yehuda who usher on him. Right? So this is the case of if the tree falls in the forest and there's no one there, it doesn't make any noise. The bittul rishus didn't affect anything, and therefore that bittul rishus is ineffective. It doesn't. It's as if it never happened. You can't be mevatel rishus to individuals that aser on each other, right? So that's just the point that the Mishnah Berurah wanted to make over here. Okay, now let's go weiter in Sif Beis in the Mechaber, and now let's see scenario number 2, right? Scenario number 1, 2 chatzeres, door between them. They each had their own chatzeres, they were mevatel rishus to each other. What's scenario number 2? Where you're going to have a bittul rishus from one chatzar to another chatzar. Says the Mechaber, 4th line down, beginning of the line, V'loishna ervu yachad. Or you could have another scenario. What would that scenario be? Chatzar A and Chatzar B joined in a joint Eruv Chatzeros. Okay, Ois Katan Tes, says the Mishnah Berurah, V'loishna ervu yachad, Mairi b'shashachach echad behen v'lo yerev. What's scenario number 2? Chatzar A and Chatzar B joined in a joint Eruv Chatzeros, but somebody in one of these Chatzeros did not join the Eruv Chatzeros. So now the whole Eruv Chatzeros is bust, because there's one entity over here that neglected to join. The Yachal Levatel Rishusai Lebnei Chatzar Shaloi V'gam Lebnei Acheres. So Chatzar A, Chatzar B tried to join in a joint Eruv Chatzeros. Reuven and Chatzar A never joined the Eruv. Now that Ruvain and Chatzar never joined the Erev, the whole Erev is bust, because there's two entities here. There's everybody from Chatzar and Chatzar B who joined in a joint to Ruvain Chatzar and Ruvain. So what's the Eitzah? Ruvain has to be Mavatal Rishus to everybody. He has to be Mavatal Rishus to the people of his Chatzar. He also has to be Mavatal Rishus to the people of the other Chatzar. So that was scenario number 2. Now comes the statement that the Mechaber makes that goes back on scenario number 1. Says the Mechaber, 4th line down. In that scenario, where Chatzar A had its own Eruv Chatzeros, Chatzar B had its own Eruv Chatzeros, right? And now they want to, on Shabbos, let's say, join. So now the people of Chatzar B could be Mavatal Rishus to the people of Chatzar A. What will be gained by that, says the Mechaber? Yechoyle kol achas levatal rishusa lachaverta. Each one of the two Chatzeros could be Mavatal to the other. Meaning, either Chatzar B could be Mavatal to Chatzar A, or Chatzar A could be Mavatal to Chatzar B. Whichever direction you go in, what will be accomplished will be lihiyos muteres lihishtamish ba v'loihi. What will happen is the recipient of the Bittul Rishus will be able to be mishtamish in both Chatzeros. The Mavatal will not. Again, lihiyos muteres, so that the recipient of the Bittul Rishus will be muter lihishtamish ba. So, if Chatzar A is the recipient of Chatzar B's Bittul Rishus, Chatzar A will be muter to transfer Kalim Sheshavsu Babayis from their houses to their Chatzar, from their houses to Chatzar B, they'll be muter, v'loi hi. But Chatzar B, who in this case is the Mevatel, or the Mevatlim, they are being Mevatel their Rishus, they will be Aser. They won't be allowed to even transfer from their houses in their Chatzar to their own Chatzar, because they're making their houses now distinct from the Chatzeros. So that would be Aser. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Ois Katan Yud, Liyos Muteres V'lohi, Koi Aresha. This goes back on scenario number 1, Ahecha She'erva Kalachas La'atzma, where Chatzar A and Chatzar B made their own Iruv Chatzeros. Dahamevatlim Rishusam, Chatzar B, who in my case are the Mevatlim, they're being mevatel the rishus to Chatzar A, shuv asurim lahitzi mibateim lechatzar. They become aser to transfer from their houses even to their own chatzar, because their houses are distinct. And how about scenario number 2? In scenario number 2, where the two Chatzeris tried to join in a joint river Chatzeris, but one guy got left out. And now Ruvain and Chatzar A is being Mavatal Rishus both to the people of his Chatzar and Chatzar A and to the people of Chatzar B, so that they should be able to have a good joint to river Chatzeris. He alone will be usher to transfer from his house to anywhere, but all of the other people of Chatzar A and Chatzar B will be mutter to freely transfer from their houses to both Chatzeros. Okay, let's go weiter in the Mechaber. Now we're going to get a little bit more complex. Now we are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1 second. Now we are, I lost the place here. Give me 1 second. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 lines down, a little bit into the line, says the Mechaber. Another scenario. Loishna shtei chatzeros zu lifdim mizu. Remember those? Also, another case where you could have bittul rishus from one chatzar to another chatzar. Let's say you have that famous case that we dealt with so much, where you have an inner chatzar and an outer chatzar. Chatzar A is the outer chatzar, it opens up to Rishus Harabim. Chatzar B is the inner chatzar that no through traffic. It only has access to Chatzar A, and from Chatzar A out to the Rishus Harabim. Over there also you can have scenarios where you need bittul rishus across chatzar lines, right? From one chatzar to another. Let's say you have 2 chatzeres zulufnim mizu. V'loy ervu ela hachitzayna levada. The outside one, Chatzar A, made an eruv chatzeros. The inner one, the pnimis, Chatzar B, did not make an Eruv Chatzeros. What's the halacha in that case? Well, Chatzer B is definitely Aser, even in their own Chatzer. They didn't make an Eruv Chatzeros. So nobody in Chatzer B is allowed to transfer from their houses to their Chatzer, right? How about Chatzer A? Chatzer A made an Eruv Chatzeros. But Chatzer A's Eruv Chatzeros is no good. Why? Because Chatzer B has a Drisas Regel on Chatzer A. And Chatzer B is a Regel Ha'iseres Bimkaima. They're Aser in their own Chatzer. Therefore, their Drisas Regel Asers on Chatzer A. So right now, in this scenario, Chatzer B, the Pnimis is Aser. Chatzer A, the Chitzaina, is also Aser. Again, let's read it inside. Lo yishnar shtei Chatzer zuluf to bizuv lo yervu ala Chitzaina levada. She Pnimis Oiseres ala Chitzaina. In that case, Chatzer B, the Pnimis Asers on the Chitzaina, because Regel Oiseres b'mkaima. Still, you could rectify the situation. How? And we learned this already in Mishnah Berurah, when we were discussing the cases of a Pnimis and a Chitzaina. Says the Machaber, Yechayla levata la Rishusa, Chatzer B could be mevatel the Rishus of their Chatzer. Now, in this case, the people in the Pnimis did not join as a unified group. So if Reuven, Shimon, Levi, and Yehuda live in the Pnimis, each one is going to have to be mevatel Rishus to the members of the Chitzaina. Yechayla levata la Rishusa, the people in the Pnimis could be mevatel Rishus to the Chitzaina. Now, what are they trying to accomplish by doing that? They're going to be mevatel Rishus to the Chitzaina. So now we're trying to make that they should not aser on the Chitzaina. This is actually a fascinating case. Yechayla levata la Rishusa, shaloi tishtamesh v'loi tavar aleha. They have to say, we're relinquishing our rights. I think what they're relinquishing is, they're not relinquishing the rights on the Pnimis. Because the Pnimis is not what's asering on the Chitzaina, right? Again, let's get this straight. Right. You have the Chitzaina and the Pnimis. The Chitzaina has its own Eruv Chatzeros. What's asering on the Chitzaina? The Pnimis is not asering on the Chitzaina. There's a kaisel, there's a wall between the Pnimis and the Chitzaina. They're not mechuyev to join in a joint Eruv Chatzeros, right? There's a wall, there's a wall, it has a door. So what? Options are open. The Chitzaina is allowed to make its own Eruv Chatzeros. The Pnimis doesn't aser on the Chitzaina. What asers on the Chitzaina? What asers on the Chitzaina is the Drisas Regel that the Pnimis has on the Chitzaina. And why does that Drisas Regel aser? Because the Pnimis is a Regel ha'iseres b'mkaima. Since the Pnimis doesn't have any Eruv Chatzeros, they're aser in the Pnimis. Therefore, they aser, their Drisas Regel asers on the Chitzaina. But ultimately, what's asering on the Chitzaina? Not the Pnimis itself, right? What's asering on the Chitzaina is the Drisas Regel that the Pnimis has on the Chitzaina. So what the Pnimis have, they don't have to relinquish their Rishus of their Chatzer. They don't have to give up the Rishus that they have in their Chatzer HaPnimis to the Chatzer HaChitzaina. What they have to relinquish to the Chatzer HaChitzaina is their Drisas Regel that they have on the Chitzaina. That's what they have to give up. Now that we understand that, the next question that we have to understand is, what does it mean for the people of the Pnimis to be mevatel the rishus that they have in the Chitzaina of the Drisas Regel? What does that mean? Let's say, okay, we're mevatel the rishus that we have on the Drisas Regel. Now on Shabbos, they wake up in the morning, they go to shul. So they go through the Chitzaina to go to the Rishus Harabim to go to shul. Does that mean that they were just mevatel their bittul rishus? What do you mean? You were mevatel your Drisas Regel. No, it doesn't mean that. What does it mean? Let's see what the Mechaber says. The Mechaber says, Yechayla levata la rishusa, the people of the Pnimis could be mevatel the rishus that they have, the Drisas Regel that they have on the Chitzaina. Shaloi tishtamesh, that they will not use the Chitzaina, v'loi tavar aleha, and they will not cross through the Chitzaina, ella b'shah shetzricha lotzeis, only when they have to go through the Chitzaina to get to the Rishus Harabim. Meaning, what they're saying is, we will only use the Drisas Regel to access the Rishus Harabim. we will not go through the chitzayna and put a pitcher of lemonade in the chitzayna. That's hishtamshus in the chitzayna. If they try to make hishtamshus in the chitzayna, then they weren't mavatl rishus, right? Or if they were mavatl rishus, they took it back. But walking through the chitzayna to get to the rishus harabim does not constitute hishtamshus in the chotzer. And if the primus is mevatel rishus in that way to the chitzayna, says the mechaber, the tiyah chitzayna muteris. Now the chitzayna will be muter. Says the Mishnah Berurah in Ois Katan Yud Aleph. V'loy ervu ela chitzayna balvad. What the Mishnah Berurah is saying over here is, what the mechaber is saying over here is, what's the scenario? Pnimis chitzayna, the chitzayna has in the Ruva Chatzeris, the pnimis does not. Says the Mishnah Berurah, first of all, it's very critical to this case that the chitzayna has its own Ruva Chatzeris. Dem gam chitzayna layervu, if the chitzayna doesn't have any Ruva Chatzeris on its own, loyefshe bebittel, so then bittel doesn't even start. Dein mevatel rishos l'shtayim. What kind of bittel? The people in the pnimis are going to be mevatel the dris regel to who? To each resident of the chitzayna. If a tree falls into the forest and no one's there, does it make any noise? They can't do that. Ois cotton yud beis levada. The chitzayna made its own iruva chatzeros. What's the problem in this case? Why do the chitzayna have a problem? Va'oz hevi apnimis regel ha'asura b'mekayma va'iseri shalei b'mekayma, because the pnimis didn't make an iruva chatzeros. So in the pnimis are also in their own chatzer. So they're a regel ha'iseri b'mekayma. Now they're drisis a regel on the chitzayna. Aser is the chitzayna. The chanal b'simin shenayin ches. Ois cotton yud gimel. So what's the eitzah? The eitzah is that the pnimis have to be mevatel the rishus over the dris regel in the chitzayna to the bnei chitzayna. How do you do that? You say we're only going to use the dris regel to go out to the rishus harabim. We're not going to be mishtamish in your chotzer. Ois cotton yud gimel b'shashes tzricha lotzes the ein dris regel oiser ele imasias tashmish. Wish we saw this before, right? What does it mean that dris regel asers? Dris regel is not really a shtamshus in the chotzer. If I'm leaving my chotzer apnimis to get to the rishus harabim, that's not called I'm using your chotzer. Using your chotzer is hishtamshus b'chotzer. If I bring lemonade with me and I put it down in your chotzer, then I used your chotzer. Okay, now we go to the next scenario of a pnimi and a chitzayna. Oi. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines off the bottom, near the beginning of the line. Oi, another scenario where we have a pnimi and a chitzayna, and we need to be mevatel rishus across chotzer lines. Oi, inter chotzer bittel. Oi, im ervu yachad. Let's say the pnimis and the chitzayna made a joint eruva chatzeres, right? Which they're allowed to do. Oyem ervu yachad, the nastu eruvan b'chitzayna. Okay, they made the joint eruva chatzeros, and where is the eruv located? In the chitzayna. Now, don't get too hung up on that, because the Mishnah Berurah ultimately is going to say it doesn't matter where the eruv is. The mechaber says that the eruv was in the chitzayna. Okay, fine. Oyem ervu yachad, the pnim the chitzayna, they joined in the joint eruva chatzeros. The nastu eruvan b'chitzayna, and they placed the eruv in the chatzer chitzayna. And now what happened? V'shakach echad min ha'pnimis v'loy erav. One guy living in the pnimi failed to join the erav. Stop. Pause. What's the halacha now? Well, if one guy in the pnimi did not join the erav, he asers on everybody, right? Because he asers on the pnimi in his own chotzer, because the chotzer pnimis is now serving more than one entity. Now that he asers on the pnimis is a regular iseris b'mekayma. Now that it's a regular iseris b'mekayma, they aser on the chitzayna. Okay, what's the way to rectify it? Yachal levatel rishusay. This guy in the pnimi could be mevatel rishus. What does that mean? The first thing he has to do is he has to be mevatel rishus to all of his fellows in the pnimi, to bring back, to now reestablish an eruva chatzeros in the pnimi. V'gam l'chol echad b'mnei hachitzaina. But he also has to be mevatel his rishus over the drisas haregel in the chitzaina to the b'nei hachitzaina. Why? So again, the math is very simple. And really we did this already previously. We had this exact case. In the chatzar hapnimi, he's answering on the other pnimis. Fine. So he's mevatel rishus to the rest of the pnimis. Now, what's the halacha now in the pnimis? So let's say in the pnimis, you have Ruvain, Shimon, Levi, and Yehuda. Ruvain is the guy that got left out. All right. Ruvain is mevatel rishus to Shimon, Levi, and Yehuda. What's the halacha now in the pnimis? Shimon, Levi, and Yehuda are allowed to transfer from their houses to the chatzar and vice versa. Ruvain's not, because Ruvain's house is distinct. He wasn't mevatel rishus over his house. He was only mevatel rishus over the chatzar. So Ruvain's not allowed to transfer from his house to the chatzar, right? So now, in the pnimi, you're okay. But Ruvain is still a regel ha'isseres b'mkaima. Because Ruvain's not allowed to transfer from his house to the chatzar. Since Ruvain is a regel ha'isseres b'mkaima, his dris is a regel on the chitzaina, aser's on the chitzaina. So, Ruvain first had to be mevatel rishus to Shimon, Levi, and Yehuda in the pnimis. Then he has to be mevatel rishus over his dris is a regel in the chitzaina, to the other b'nei chitzayna. Then everything is okay. That's what the Mechaber says. Dainu sheyivat l'rishus l'chalecha b'nei pnimis, v'gam l'chalecha b'nei chitzayna, and then v'yiyahu levadei aser v'kulam mutarim. And at the end of the day, bottom line, everybody in the chatzar and the pnimis is mutar except Ruvain. Ruvain can't transfer from his house to anywhere. Says the Mishnah Berurah. Ois cutting your daled. Now, I'm going to skip your daled for the moment. First, we're going to do the easier Mishnah Berurahs. First, let's do Tezvav and Tezayin. Then we'll go back to your daled. Ois cutting Tezvav. V'gam l'chol echad b'mnei hachitzaina. It's not enough for Ruvain in the pnimis to be mevatel rishus to the other pnimis. He has to be mevatel his rishus over the dris seregel to the b'nei hachitzaina. V'gam l'chol echad b'mnei hachitzaina. First of all, there's a very high-level reason why he has to do that. Even without the dris seregel, shenasu k'chatzar echad al yedei ha'erev, because, right, I got hung up on the dris seregel issue, but the truth is, there's a more basic problem than just the dris seregel issue, and that is that since the pnimi and the chitzayna joined in one eruv chatzeros, when Reuven got left out of the erev of the pnimi, he's also left out of the erev on the chitzayna, right? He's a separate entity from the whole joint erev. So yeah, he has to be mevatel rishus to the pnimi's end of the chitzayna. Forget the dris seregel. I got all hung up on the dris seregel. You don't even have to get hung up on the dris seregel. Says the Mishnah Berurah weiter. Va'afilu im yirtzu b'nei pnimi lehistalik atzman min hachitzayna. Okay, how about this? Let's say Reuven decides, you know what? I'll be mevatel rishus to my friends Shimon, Levi, and Yehuda here in the chitzayna. I'm not interested in being mevatel rishus to these people in the chitzayna. I'm sorry, I think I said it wrong. I'll be mevatel to my friends Shimon, Levi, and Yehuda here in the pnimis. But I'm not interested in being mevatel rishus to the uphill people over there in the chitzayna. I don't know them. They're hoity-toity. I don't want to be mevatel rishus to the bnei chitzayna. And here in the pnimi, once I'm mevatel rishus to the bnei pnimi, we'll shut the door and we'll say that we're separate from the chitzaynim. We'll have a good erev here inside the pnimis. They'll have a problem out in the chitzayna. Can we do that? No, we can't. Says the Mishnah Berurah, even if Reuven wants to only be mevatel rishus to the pnimis, not to the chitzayna, and they'll close the door and they'll cut themselves off and think that they're sitting pretty, gam ken loy mahani. It won't help. Not even for the pnimis. Loy mahani bebitul b'nei pnimi levad. It won't work for Reuven just to be mevatel to his friends in the pnimi. The chanal b'sifkat nakaidim. We already covered this. We didn't see it because we didn't see Yodalad yet. But we already covered it in earlier. Certainly, if the erev is located in the chitzayna, you can't do this, right? Because Reuven will be mevatel rishus to the other pnimis. They'll close the door to the chitzayna. Where's the box of matzahs? Where's the erev? The erev is in the chitzayna. If you cut yourself off from the erev of the chitzayna, you don't have an erev. So certainly, if the erev is in the chitzayna, Reuven and the pnimis can't do this. But they also can't do it even if the erev is in the pnimis. This goes back on the phrase before. They certainly can't do it if the erev is in the chitzayna. But in your dalid that I skipped so far, we'll see that the pnimis can't do it even if the erev is in the pnimi. Why? Sheha'ivus ba'mehem. Because the problem emanates from their chutzner. Remember what we learned earlier? Since in this case, Reuven is a pnimi, and he is the problem, so the problem is emanating from the pnimis, they don't get the right to close the door and say that the chitzayna doesn't have a drisas haregel on them. To a certain extent, the chitzayna does have a drisas haregel in the pnimi, because they were expecting to have an eruv together with them. So in their mindset, they expect to have a drisas haregel on the pnimis. You can't cut them off when the ivus comes from you. Let's just see Tezayin, and then we'll go back to Yudalit. In this case, Reuven, everybody else in the Chaser and Pnimis will be mutter. Reuven, the Pnimi who got left out of the Erev and was Mavatal Rishus, he'll be Aser. Like always, the Mavatal, his house is distinct from the rest of the Chaser. Everything else is a distinct Rishus HaYachid. He'll be Aser to transfer a Keilah Shavas Babayis. Now let's go back to Yudalit. So like I pointed out when I said the Mechaber couched this case that the Erev is in the Chitzayna. Says the Mishnah Berurah, and we really just explained it. That's why I wanted to do this backwards. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Lav Dafka. This halach is true even if the Erev is in the Pnimi. The Erev doesn't have to be the Chitzayna. The only way to rectify this situation is for the Pnimi to be Mavatal Rishus, both to the Bnei Pnimi and to the Bnei Chitzayna. And it doesn't matter where the Erev is. It wouldn't be enough for him to only be Mavatal Rishus to his friends in the Pnimi. So that now he's a guest by his friends in the Pnimi. So that he doesn't aser on the rest of the Pnimis. And then they'll argue that they'll close the door and cut themselves off from the Chitzayna. That doesn't help. Again, the Mechaber said the Erev is in the Chitzayna. If the Erev is in the Chitzayna, certainly the Pnimis can't cut themselves off. Because by cutting themselves off, they're cutting themselves off from their Erev. If they cut themselves off from their Erev, they don't have an Erev, even if Reuven is Mavatal Rishus to them. So that's a Davar Pashut. But says the Mishnah Berurah, it doesn't work even if the Erev is in the Pnimi. So they don't cut themselves off from the Erev. Why doesn't it work? Says the Mishnah Berurah, because since the problem is emanating from within their own chutzner, it's Reuven who lives by them in the Pnimi who's the cause of the problem, who forgot to join the Erev. They can't cut themselves off. Once they went ahead and they went to join a joint Eruv Chatzeris with the Chitzayna, now they cannot cut themselves off from the Chitzayna, even if the Erev is by them. Why? Because when they Mitchila went to join, they granted the Chitzayna Madrisas Haregel into them. Now they want to take away their Madrisas Haregel and claim their independence. They can't do that when the Ivus comes from them. When it's one of the people in their chutzner creating the problem, they can't do it. If the problem would be emanating from one of the Bnei Chitzayna, then they can do it. Why? Because we saw earlier. Then their argument is, hey, we only joined in an Erev with you if it was going to benefit us. If now it's hurting us because somebody by you was a klutz, we don't want to have anything to do with you. Then they can. But in this case, they cannot. Thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah. The schluss of limud HaTorah should be megan against Klal Yisrael. The Ran Shem should send Yeshua's reverse Parnasim Shidduchim Dolos in need. We should be zeichet to see the BS called Tzedek. B'mher v'yameinu amen. Be well.